Can money actually buy ethics? Well, today, we're diving into a really fascinating 2013 study by Bahauddin Mujtaba and his team. We're unpacking a complex, universal issue here: the deep links between a country's wealth, its foundational culture, and its level of systemic corruption. It touches on everything from global business to international law and even human psychology. The data we're about to explore, it might literally change how you view global economics.
It's just a reality that corruption exists everywhere. It crosses all borders and systems. But we have to ask the big question: does money actually cure it? Think about it. As a society gets richer, do bribery and shady public dealings actually drop? Or do wealthy nations just get better at hiding it? To get to the bottom of this, researchers had to measure the seemingly unmeasurable.
And measuring something inherently hidden, like illegal bribes, is incredibly tricky, right? No one is officially reporting their bribes on a tax return. That's exactly why researchers rely on the Corruption Perception Index, or CPI. It's a highly trusted metric from Transparency International. They use expert assessments and business executive surveys to gauge exactly how corrupt a country's public sector is perceived to be.
Okay, now for wealth, the study uses GNP per capita. You can think of this as the total financial output of a country's citizens, including global businesses and entrepreneurship in a given year, all divided by its population. Stacking these two metrics together allows us to see exactly how the financial output of a nation's citizens stacks up against their perceived ethical behavior.
Section 1. The Cultural Divide. Before we jump into the hard numbers, we really have to recognize that corruption doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's actually rooted in a fundamental philosophical divide regarding human relationships. So, in Western cultures, we often see a strong lean toward individualism. Decisions are frequently made based on whether an action leads to personal gain, usually driven by a short-term perspective and a super high value placed on independence. But over in Eastern cultures, the dominant attitude is collectivism. The focus completely shifts to group welfare, preserving social relationships, and a long-term mindset where sharing resources is basically the bedrock of society.
And this creates a massive gray area for global managers trying to navigate business across borders. On one hand, you've got guanxi. This is an essential, culturally accepted Asian practice of building tight interpersonal connections over a long period of time just to establish trust. But on the other hand, you have strict Western definitions of bribery, which laws like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act strictly define as illegal one-time payments to secure a deal. The fine line between corporate hospitality meant to build trust and an illegal bribe meant to buy a contract, it is incredibly blurred.
Section 2. What the data reveals.
So, do these deep-seated cultural differences overshadow the almighty dollar? Well, when researchers map gross national product against the Corruption Perception Index across 66 different countries, an undeniable, mathematically significant straight line emerges. As a country's wealth increases, its perceived level of corruption plummets. This isn't just some vague trend, guys. Higher wealth strongly and directly correlates with lower perceived corruption. To make absolutely sure this wasn't just an anomaly, the researchers stress-tested their model. And guess what? Even when flipping the variables around, making wealth the dependent variable and corruption the independent variable, the linear trend holds incredibly strong. This proves we aren't just looking at a fluke found in a few Western nations. No way. This is a robust global reality that spans continents, cultures, and legal systems.
Astonishingly, the data analysis revealed this exact number: 78.6%. A massive 78.6% of the variation in global corruption levels across these 66 countries is explained purely by wealth alone. Almost 4/5 of the reason a country is perceived as more or less corrupt literally comes down to its gross national product. This massive statistical weight really leaves us to wonder, what actually drives this incredibly powerful connection?
Section 3. Investigating the root causes.
Since the data overwhelmingly proves that richer countries are less corrupt, we kind of have to put on our detective hats and ask why. Why does money have this cleansing effect on public sector ethics? Well, researchers propose 3 potential drivers. First up is needs theory, which relates to basic human survival. In poor nations, people, and yes, that includes government workers, might act corruptly simply because they have to physically survive and feed their families. Step 2 is enforcement. Wealthier governments naturally collect higher taxes, meaning they can actually fund better policing, auditors, and anti-corruption agencies. And step 3 is salary imbalance. When public officials are vastly underpaid compared to the private sector, they might rationalize taking facilitating payments just to achieve a basic standard of living.
Section 4. The cultural base point.
Okay, remember that big number we mentioned earlier? Wealth explains 78.6% of the variation. But what about that remaining 21.4%? Well, the researchers hypothesize that every society has an inherent, culturally determined baseline of corruption. Think of it like a natural starting point on a graph. Then, as a nation's wealth grows over time, its level of corruption naturally drops from that unique starting point. Basically, your culture sets the starting line, but your wealth dictates how fast you run away from it.
This means your corruption baseline might depend on some pretty deep-rooted historical factors. It could be tied to cultural typologies, like the Anglo-Germanic, Nordic, or Latin classifications developed by sociologist Geert Hofstede. It might also stem from dominant religious frameworks, whether a country is predominantly Judeo-Christian, Islamic, or Buddhist. Or, interestingly enough, it could be heavily influenced by the historical impact of a colonizing power. For example, Singapore's incredibly low corruption levels might be partially explained by the traditional administrative frameworks left behind by the British Empire, combined, of course, with their explosive economic growth.
All of this brings us to a really powerful conclusion directly from the researchers. Wealth, therefore, as a component of a societal culture, emerges as a significant aspect of corruption. So wealth isn't just money sitting in a bank. It isn't something totally separate from society. Wealth fundamentally acts as a core component of a society's culture that actively shapes and dictates its ethical norms.
As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with a provocative thought to explore on your own. Considering your own nation's history, what forces initially set your cultural baseline for corruption? Think about your country's religious foundations, its historical conflicts, and its economic evolution. Understanding this doesn't just explain the past, it might absolutely be the key to fixing the future.